It was getting more serious and we didn't know what was going on.
Like being standing out in the middle of a hurricane. I was really afraid of being blown off the boat.
I wished that I could have just said, "Scotty, beam us up."
The vessel was just tossing to and from, and I remember thinking to myself, there's no way that we can hoist her off this ship.
I thought I was going to die there in the middle of the ocean.
From the Weather Channel, this is Storm Stories with meteorologist Jim Cantori.
July 5th, 2003. Janice and Glenn Wilson are with their friends, Pablo and Mary Vitaver, off the coast of Bermuda. They're sailing Pablo's 44-foot yacht 700 miles north to Rhode Island. It's a 6-day trip when the weather is right, and if today is any indication, the crew can expect smooth sailing.
The seas were about 2 to 4 foot. The winds were 10 to 15 knots. The water is a beautiful turquoise color, and it was an absolutely perfect beginning to a sailboat trip.
The boat is called Alegria, which means happiness in Spanish. And as Janice relaxes on deck, she can't help but think that the name fits.
It was absolutely gorgeous. The seas were beautiful, and I was feeling wonderful.
Feeling wonderful is especially important to Janice, who often suffers from seasickness. She and Glenn are using this trip as a test run to help them decide whether they should buy their own boat when they retire.
This gave us the opportunity to see how we experience the seas, and we really enjoy it as much as we think we will.
But when it comes to experiencing the seas, the four friends are about to get more than they bargained for. A pocket of cold air over the United States is about to meet a warm front over the Atlantic Ocean. This interaction will trigger powerful thunderstorms. And the Alegria is heading right into them. About an hour and a half after setting sail, Janice begins to feel nauseous. She retreats to the boat's cabin.
I just laid there and took little sips of water whenever I could, but I was constantly throwing up.
It wouldn't be unusual for her to get seasick, so we thought that within hours or a day or two at the most, she'd be completely over it and enjoy the rest of the trip.
This time, however, Janice doesn't improve. As the hours pass, she feels worse. She cannot eat or drink anything and becomes dehydrated.
We would ask, are you drinking water? Do you need anything? That kind of thing. But that was pretty much all you could do.
The next day, Janice is still confined to her bunk, and she has had barely anything to eat or drink. To make matters worse, as she gets weaker, the wind becomes stronger. Gusts of more than 20 miles an hour cause the Alegria to pitch and roll. By 10 p.m. on July 7th, Janice can hardly stand it.
My heart just started pounding. I mean, I could feel it. You could see it pounding in my chest. And I felt that strange, fuzzy feeling you get sometimes before you pass out.
Afraid she might be having a heart attack, the mother of four calls Glenn to her side.
I remember saying to him, I don't want to die. Because I'm out in the middle of the ocean, and I knew there was nothing we could do.
I've been married 35 years to her. She bore the pain of childbirth with hardly a grimace, and now to hear her holding my hand telling me she thinks she's dying was a tremendous shock to me.
Glenn is afraid Janice might be suffering from more than seasickness. He rushes on deck to talk to Pablo, who's at the wheel. But the boat is more than 400 miles from its destination, and Pablo isn't sure what they should do. He calls the first number he finds in a local boating guide and reaches a towboat company. He is immediately transferred to a doctor on a cruise ship.
By maritime law, you are mandated, obligated to render assistance to a vessel in distress. And at that point, we were in distress.
Pablo told him my symptoms, and The doctor said it was from extreme dehydration. And for me to have just like little teaspoons of water every couple of hours.
The doctor reassures Pablo that Janice's condition doesn't sound serious, but he does suggest the crew turn around and sail 300 miles back to Bermuda. After a group meeting, though, the two couples decide to stay on their original course.
We thought it's seasickness, she'll be better by tomorrow anyway. If we go back to Bermuda, we just have to turn around when she feels better and head back to the United States again.
24 hours later, Glenn begins to regret that decision. The storms generated by the weather system have moved east, and now they lie right between the Alegria and the safety of an American port. By 11 p.m. on July 8th, the crew is battling blistering rain, 40-mile-an-hour winds, and mammoth waves.
The boat was dancing like a cork on top of the waters and being pushed by the water and the winds.
Looking across the sea, it was almost as if you were watching apartment buildings coming at you, and the boat would slowly rise up and go over these apartment buildings.
Below deck, Janice is sicker than she's ever been. Her pain is aggravated by the storm raging outside and the water pouring through leaky hatches.
Think of the worst virus you've ever had where you just ache all over and somebody tosses you back and forth and squirts water in your face every now and then. That's about what I felt like at that point.
Glenn is frightened. Clutching anything he can hold on to, he stumbles into the cabin to comfort his wife. Then he hears Pablo make an unsettling request.
I asked them to put their life preservers to get the emergency supplies near the exit.
He said, get the life raft near the ladder to the companionway hatch. At that point, I became very concerned.
I felt bad laying around in the cabin. I couldn't imagine what I was going to feel like tossed around in a lifeboat in the seas. It was frightening.
As the storm reaches its pinnacle, so do Janice's symptoms. Searing pain rips through her abdomen.
It had spread across my whole stomach. That's when we decided we needed to find out what it was, because that had nothing to do with seasickness.
The crewmates now know they are in an emergency situation 300 miles from land in the heart of a brutal storm. Pablo makes a critical decision. At 12:55 a.m., he grabs his radio and places a desperate Mayday call. A move reserved for only life or death situations.
Mayday, 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 this sailing vessel Alegria. We have a person seriously ill with what appears to be that she will die without proper medical care.
At first, no answer.
Silence. Silence never sounded so loud.
Getting no response on the radio, Pablo immediately uses his backup satellite phone to call the towboat company again. Within minutes, he's talking to Dr. Brent Pennington, who's stationed with the U.S. Coast Guard on Cape Cod.
What about the cutter?
Pablo puts the doctor on speakerphone so Glenn can relay information about Janice's condition.
I said, what I want you to do is gently put your hands on her abdomen and tell me if it's hard or soft. And tell me if she winces or moans when you do that.
I did push on her stomach. It was very rigid. It was almost as if her muscles were tensed in the middle of doing a sit-up. And I barely touched her, and she said it was very painful.
It was a very sharp, piercing pain in my stomach. The only pain that a woman can relate to is childbirth.
At that point, I said, okay, that's very suggestive of appendicitis. We don't have a lot of time to get her into medical attention.
Appendicitis is a serious infection that can cause the appendix to burst. And if not treated in time, it's fatal.
I didn't know if it had burst yet or not, and I had no idea how long I had.
It was like getting hit by lightning. I thought I might be taking my wife back to the dock, wrapped in a sheet.
Pennington orders the crew of the Alegria to give the Coast Guard Command Center regular updates on the boat's position. Then, with Janice's life on the line, a rescue team springs into action.
There was bad weather, there was fog, we were rapidly running out of time, so that was really the question, is whether we were going to get there in time or not.
Just after midnight, July 9th, 2003, a treacherous storm over the Atlantic Ocean is creating 40-mile-an-hour winds and massive waves. Janice and Glenn Wilson, along with their friends, Pablo and Mary Vitaver, are sailing Pablo's 44-foot yacht, Alegria, through the middle of the gale. While seas break across the deck, Janice is in the cabin below. She's had almost nothing to eat or drink for 3 days and is suffering from a potentially fatal case of appendicitis.
It's not like something that's going to go away, and it's not something that gets better. It only gets worse and that you have limited time.
300 miles west in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, Coast Guard rescuers are aware of how limited their time is. They plan to dispatch a Coast Guard cutter to the Alegria. A helicopter will follow and airlift her from the cutter to a hospital. At 1:20 a.m., the cutter begins its mission to evacuate Janice. But within an hour, it's battling the same unrelenting storm that's pummeled the sailboat.
The weather was bad, and the fog was very dense, and the Coast Guard cutter just couldn't get there because they had to slow down in order to safely get through the weather.
Hours pass as the would-be rescuers wait. Then at 9:30 a.m., the Coast Guard Command Center starts to work on another, riskier plan. Helicopter pilot Jason Dorval and his crew prepare to basket lift Janice directly off the Alegria.
We started looking at the weather and stuff like that, and it was determined that we were going to delay and see how the weather improved.
Fuel is also an issue. The Coast Guard team must wait until the yacht is within the chopper's 200-mile flying range. At 10:05 a.m., they get the go-ahead. The storm has cleared, and the Alegria is within a safe distance. Lieutenant Dorval and his crew set off on the 175-mile journey. En route, Dorval warns Pablo about the hazards of a sailboat hoist.
We had them pull down their sails, secure any loose gear on the boat.
They said to drop anything that can fly from the boat, drop it inside the boat, because the helicopter can pick it up and bring the chopper down, maybe on top of the boat, where then you have many more casualties.
At 11:05 a.m., Mary spots the chopper.
We quickly pushed the cushions into the inside the boat so that we could, get Janice out easily.
But getting Janice out will not be easy. As the helicopter hovers above the Alegria, it whips up 100-mile-an-hour winds.
You couldn't even walk on deck. You had to crawl on your hands and knees or it would have just blown you overboard.
The water is being picked up from the ocean and thrown at your eyes. The noise of the helicopter is deafening.
Earlier, Pablo and Glenn brought the sails down, but now the hurricane-force winds from the rotor drive the mainsail back up the 60-foot mast. The Alegria is now a moving target for the chopper crew.
They were moving, I think, 12 to 14 knots, which is extremely fast.
Glenn and Pablo scramble to pull the sails back down and steady the boat. Up above, Lieutenant Dorval tries to hold the helicopter in place.
You can see the mast out the window sliding back and forth. That was the closest I've ever been to a sailboat mast. It can be very disorienting seeing that, trying to hold that position.
Finally, the chopper stabilizes just 15 feet above the swinging mast. Hoist operator Chris Davis gets ready for the basket rescue off the sailboat's deck. It's the first time he's tried this difficult maneuver.
This was extremely different from anything I had dealt with before. I saw everything that was involved in it, and it just kind of, all right, let's take a look at this, and you take it step by step.
Davis sends down a rope with a weight bag on its end to act as a guide for the basket. He has to hit a 4x5 foot area on the deck. He surprises even himself when he nails it on his first attempt.
I was relieved when I got the trail in on deck, just that, okay, that's the hard part.
But the danger is far from over. Janice still needs to be lifted 75 feet up to the helicopter. Pablo secures the basket while Glenn helps his ailing wife crawl across the deck.
I was on my hands and knees down to that deck as much as I could because I was literally afraid of being blown off the boat.
With wind and water in her face, Janice scrambles into the basket. Immediately, Officer Davis starts to lift her. Janice is afraid of heights, so as she swings through the air, she tries to stay focused on the helicopter above.
I had a death grip on the sides of the basket as I was going up. I didn't look down and I didn't look to the sides. I just looked up and I stared at the underbelly of the helicopter.
In less than a minute, Officer Davis pulls the basket into the helicopter. Janice tumbles out onto the floor and curls up into the fetal position.
She couldn't lay flat. She was in that much pain. She was dehydrated. She looked like she was in pretty bad shape.
There is no time to bring anyone else aboard. The chopper heads toward Cape Cod. Meanwhile, Coast Guard medic Joanne Warzinski checks Janice's vital signs.
I made sure that she was in stable condition, and she was. Her vital signs were stable.
To ease Janice's pain, Warzinski attempts to insert a needle and administer morphine. But Janice is so dehydrated that her veins have collapsed.
I tried for some of the biggest veins in the arm. I missed in the arm, I missed in the hand, missed quite a few times.
She just couldn't get anything. She said she didn't want to ruin a lot of veins attempting because she wanted to save them for the hospital.
Warzinski can only try to comfort her patient.
I held her hand, touched her forehead. I just tried to do everything I could to reassure her that we were doing everything that we could. With appendicitis, you don't know if you have minutes, hours, or days.
July 9th, 2003. A Coast Guard helicopter is rushing Janice Wilson to a hospital on Cape Cod. She has been lifted off a sailboat after spending 4 days battling a relentless storm and a ruptured appendix. If she doesn't reach the emergency room soon, the grandmother of 3 will die.
Her face was sunken, her skin was just hanging, her mouth was pretty dry and dehydrated as well.
After an hour and 10-minute flight, the crew transfers Janice to an ambulance.
Normally it takes about 3 or 4 people to take a patient out of the helicopter, but in this case I just scooped her up and held her like a baby and put her on the stretcher because she was just so little.
Back on the Alegria, Janice's husband Glenn can only wait and hope.
I was actually tremendously relieved that she was on her way. At the same time, I would have liked to have been with her.
Doctors operate to remove Janice's appendix at 5 p.m. Not a minute too soon.
The doctor said that it's the worst infection that he had ever seen in anybody who was still alive.
He didn't think she would have made it another 6 hours if she hadn't been brought into the hospital. The thought that she only had hours to live was unbelievable to think about.
2 days later, on July 11th, the Alegria finally makes it to port. Glenn rushes to the hospital to see his wife.
She was in a bed with tubes and wires everywhere, but I was tremendously relieved to see her and see that she was okay.
After a few days of recuperation, Janice leaves the hospital. But before she goes home, she visits the U.S. Coast Guard base to thank her rescuers.
I walked up, I just gave them all a hug. I mean, it is their job, but it's a wonderful job and it's a great thing that they do.
And it is a great feeling to know that she can go home to her family because the Coast Guard answered the call.
Janice and Glenn still hope to buy a boat someday, and they know the dream would not be possible without the help of so many dedicated people.
And it was all a combination of one set of people after another that actually saved my life. And grateful is the only word that I can think of. Gratefulness to people and life and this earth and everything.
What should you do if you have a medical emergency at sea? We'll tell you when Storm Stories returns. So what should you do if you have a medical emergency at sea? Prepare for the worst. Before setting off, pack a medical kit and make sure all passengers know emergency procedures, including how to use the radio and where safety equipment is stored. Call the Coast Guard early and request advice and assistance, and always keep track of your vital signs. For Storm Stories, I'm meteorologist Jim Cantori. Your local forecast is next.
This is the worst storm in the history of the